Ladies and gentlemen, if I may ask you to kindly take your seats, we're about to begin. I am Camille, I'm the chair for the EU Non-Proliferation Consortium, and it's a very great pleasure to welcome you for this third EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Conference. This conference is brought to you by the EU Non-Proliferation Consortium with the support of the European Union External Action Service. This has been a project that has been going on for now 4 years, and it has been an extraordinary privilege to work with the EU and to work jointly with the 4 institutes that manage this consortium: the Foundation for Strategic Research in Paris, EEAS in London, the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt, and CIPRI in Stockholm. But this is also a group that with more than 60 think tanks, research institutions, and other academic institutions in Europe, and I'm very happy to see many of you here today and joining us for this major flagship event of the consortium, which will now take place on a yearly basis. Just a couple of notes for our proceedings in the next couple of days. All sessions are on the record and being recorded. Plenary sessions are being live streamed on the EEAS conference website, and simultaneous sessions are being audio recorded for the purpose of transcription. We do encourage tweeting. The hashtag is EU Non-Prolif for that. There is a Wi-Fi access available for all attendees, and the code is Palace in capital. So we want this conference to be as interactive as possible, and we will try to manage as much room as possible for questions and answers. So I will ask you to keep your interventions short and to the point, and to identify yourself when asking a question or making a remark, as I don't doubt you will be doing. So let me, without further ado, thank very much Mark Fitzpatrick and his team for putting all of this together in advance. They've done a fantastic job in the previous events, and I'm quite sure this will be the case today, although we do encourage your feedback afterwards. Now I will turn to Joëlle, who's the Director for Security Policy and Conflict Prevention and a big supporter of our activities in the External Action Service. Joëlle, the floor is yours for your introduction.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I've got the great pleasure to welcome you in Brussels today in the headquarters of the European Union, and to open this timely and very important international conference. This is the third in a series of conferences organized by the EU Non-Proliferation Consortium, and it takes forward 2 successful events that were held in these premises in February 2012 and in September 2013. This conference is intended to be a point of reference for 2014 and beyond, for experts, for governmental or non-governmental specialists who share the common objective of preventing and combating the proliferations of weapons of mass destruction, illicit trafficking, and the excessive accumulation of conventional weapons and small arms. These objectives, of course, imply that we should work on other aspects that are closely related to non-proliferation, disarmament, and the peaceful, safe, and secure use of nuclear energy. What is significantly new since we met a year ago? The political context has changed, and wider strategic relationships and shifting dynamics at the regional levels will, of course, affect our WMD objectives. There are positives and negative developments, but overall, the negotiating space seems even more complex, and the need for progress even more pressing. My job seems to be getting ever busier, and I'm sure yours have too. And this is why I particularly appreciate that you're making the time to come and to contribute to countering WMD proliferation risks, given that this issue has become more important than ever. There are international political developments of great concern, but they must act as spurs and not as distractions for WMD negotiation processes. Let us start with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Today's conference comes some 8 months from the 2015 NPT Review Conference. Ukraine joined the NPT in 1994 and agreed to give up the nuclear weapons that had been stationed on its soil in exchange for security assurances, which Russia has now breached. As noted by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the implications are profound, both for regional security and the integrity of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Some have argued that if Russian annexation of the Ukrainian territory of Crimea shows that Ukraine should never have given up the nuclear weapons that were stationed on its soil prior to 1991. And I think all of you will agree, that how much more dangerous the Ukrainian crisis would be today if control of nuclear weapons were at stake. This conference also takes place at a time when the use of WMD or its threat has become alarmingly real, specifically in the case of Syria. However, the international community over the last year was able to cooperate effectively and to act promptly in carrying out the successful destruction of Syria's declared chemical weapons stockpiles. The EU contributed 17 million euros for the joint UN OPCW plan for the destruction of Syria's chemical arsenal. In addition, several EU member states made important financial contributions and contributions in kind to support the plan and accepted the destruction of waste materials on their territory. I want to take this opportunity to particularly thank Ambassador Üzümcü and Angela Kane, whom we're very, very honored to have with us today. Imagine what could have happened if we were now facing Islamic State, a non-state actor in Syria, with a chemical arsenal still in place, or if they were to possess WMD in the future. Non-state armed groups such as the Islamic State have already acquired unprecedented conventional military means without being bound by any of the legal obligations stemming from the treaties and conventions that we seek to promote and universalize. There are allegations that Islamic State might be trying to acquire WMDs. Their allies, Al-Qaeda, have explicitly stated an interest in nuclear weapons and other means of mass destruction. Preventing access to non-state parties is a strong argument for state parties to make sure their treaty obligations are met. On a more positive side, the interim agreement reached between the E3 and EU+3 and Iran in Geneva in November last year has paved the way to further intensify diplomatic efforts, which will hopefully lead to a comprehensive long-term settlement with Iran on its nuclear program. A comprehensive solution will have to build confidence in the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program by ensuring Iran's compliance with all relevant obligations under the NPT, under relevant UN Security Council resolution and IAEA Board of Governors resolutions, while at the same time fully respecting its rights to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Under the leadership of Baroness Ashton, the diplomatic process has made significant progress, and the coming weeks will be crucial in bringing efforts aimed at achieving a comprehensive settlement to a successful conclusion. The EU is committed to all three pillars of the NPT and the need for and promotion of a balance between the three pillars. This implies some tangible progress also on disarmament, Article 6. In this respect, the EU has welcomed and encouraged the nuclear weapon state meetings, such as those held in Paris in 2011, in Washington, D.C. in 2012, and in Geneva in 2013. Other initiatives, such as the conferences on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, are equally closely monitored by the EU. Even if only in terms of a minimum common denominator, the EU has been able to speak with one voice, or to avoid unwanted and uncoordinated action when it comes to nuclear disarmament. This is no small achievement, considering the different sensitivities on the subject among its member states, some of which are nuclear weapon states. The Middle East WMD free zone process and the fate of the Helsinki conference remain in the hands of the conveners as much as in the will and power of the concerned states to find a consensual way forward. I want to publicly thank the facilitator, Ambassador Laeva, and his team for their relentless efforts on the road to Helsinki. If this process will formally start, or if it will loom over the NPT review conference, is still an open question. We have continued to do our part by hosting a workshop for junior diplomats on negotiation skills on the WMD free zone in the Middle East last 18th and 19th of June. Of the 4 non-recognized nuclear states, Israel, India, Pakistan, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the latter poses the biggest risk for the credibility and effectiveness of the NPT. Although not a member of the 6-party talks, the EU has been supportive of that format and hope its discussions can be resumed. One important aspect that is related to DPRK, but that has the potential to spark other regional crises, is the right of withdrawal contained in Article 10. The EU and other like-minded states have been adamant since 2007 in indicating that there are certain conditions which states, despite their sovereign right to withdraw from the NPT, must still respect. Today's conference also takes place ahead of the BTWC Review Conference of 2016. Advances in the biological and chemical research and development fields are essential for our common future, for our wealth and well-being. The accelerated spread of technology from industrialized states to developing states has been made possible by the declining cost of new technologies. However, these transfers also require the creation of the necessary regulatory norms, for instance, on use, transfer, or the embedded of a safety and security culture. The Ebola crisis illustrates the potential impacts of biological pathogens in a globalized world. One of the responses, the vaccine that has been tested, where genetic engineering has been used to derive a potentially effective treatment, also illustrates the pace of technological change, how this is unevenly spread, and how regulatory frameworks can struggle to keep up with the pace of change. Also in today's world, we can't ignore the fact that man-made biological and bio-inspired weapons could be produced in garages and kitchens. Now, we all know it's probably a lot more difficult to use than some argue, but the threat is real. We should not discourage technological development, which is essential to our future, but we also need to encourage the right regulatory frameworks with the same determination. Are we equipped to face these old and new challenges? The European Security Strategy and the WMD strategy have both offered the EU a framework for coordinated, if not common, action under its common foreign and security policy, what we call the CFSP. CFSP mechanisms have also helped with pooling national resources and expertise around common objectives, with an accent on preventive action and effective multilateralism. The EU policy aims at pursuing universalization and full national implementation of the multilateral treaty-based system and related international instruments. In a decade of activity since the adoption of the European Security Strategy, the EU has funded existing international non-proliferation regimes and selected activities in support of non-proliferation and disarmament objectives for over 100 million euros through the adoption of 36 decisions under the CFSP budget. Another 18 million euros will be committed this year. Since 2004, the EU has become a key player in multilateral fora, striving to speak with one voice. Finally, both strategies assign great importance to cooperation with partners, whether they're key allies, new emerging powers, international organizations, or civil society. Our diplomatic action includes direct negotiations, as we have seen in the case of Iran, sanctions, but also démarches through our extended network of delegations. In the nuclear field, the EU has continued to enhance its support for the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna and to proactively promote the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The EU has persistently pressed for an early start of negotiation on a fissile material cutoff treaty. In the biological field, a peer review exercise conducted by France and an EU workshop on BTWC and compliance held last April have helped steer the discussion on an EU policy towards the next BTWC review conference. Celebrating the 10th anniversary of the adoption of Resolution 1540, the EU has boosted its support for third countries with a view to assisting them with meeting their obligations under UN Security Council Resolution 1540, and to enhance the skills of state officials involved in the export control processes. On dual-use export controls, the EU has just amended its dual-use regulation so that updates of the dual-use export control list can be more timely and predictable. On conventional arms export controls, as you know, the main international breakthrough is the Arms Trade Treaty that will enter into force very soon. This is a long list of actions, probably too long for an opening speech. But I hope it brings out our message. There is often a lot of emphasis on the importance of heavy lifting. Catastrophes, conflicts can provide impetus for change and can be the tipping point for a major change. But without prior work for achieving a common understanding, the underpinning shift in accepted thinking, persistent negotiations and the creation of effective frameworks, progress and major change would not be possible. This is why the EU has tried to be a model in engaging civil society and non-state actors to promote their active participation and gain from their expertise and inputs. Sometimes heavy lifting may seem glamorous. There's a lot to be done, and we are in for the long haul. Conferences like the one that we are starting today and tomorrow make a very important contribution. They help cement what has achieved, and they move the process along. I wish you a successful and productive event. I thank you all for your attention, and I thank in particular our partner from the EU Non-Proliferation Consortium for their enormous contribution to our work. Thank you very much.
Joëlle, thank you very much for this very substantive speech and also for your kind words vis-à-vis the consortium. I will now give the floor to our keynote speaker for this opening session. Ambassador Ahmet Üzümcü is the Director General of the OPCW since 2009, after a distinguished career in the Turkish diplomatic service and multilateral diplomacy, including posting in the UN as a permanent representative to the UN in Geneva and to NATO. Under his leadership, the OPCW has entered a new phase, playing the role you know in the management of the Syrian chemical weapon disarmament. Ambassador Üzümcü received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the OPCW for this outstanding achievement. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Grun. Let me start by thanking the European Union Non-Proliferation Consortium and the European External Action Service for convening this important conference. Scholarly discourse is vital to policymaking. The OPCW and similar international organizations stand to benefit from informed and sustained discussion among experts in our contemporary world with ever-changing security environment. Exchanges that take place at conferences like this one, in my view, are an essential input to policy formulation and implementation. Since its creation little over 4 years ago, the Consortium has more than proven its value by raising the quality of debate on disarmament and non-proliferation issues and engaging a broader range of stakeholders. All here, I'm sure, would join me in commending the remarkable success of the Consortium. It's indeed a great pleasure for me, in fact, to speak here today and to see many good friends among the audience. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a lot can happen in a single year. When you last met at the 2013 conference, it was only days after the Executive Council of the OPCW had taken an historic decision on eliminating Syria's chemical weapons. We were presented with a unique opportunity to rid the world of a major remaining chemical arsenal. There were many people who doubted that this could be done. It was still terra incognita, unknown terrain fraught with risk. Never before had the OPCW faced a task of such magnitude and importance in such difficult circumstances. 1 year on, we can proudly say that we seized that unique opportunity with both hands. We proved that it can be done, and this has been a perfect example of effective multilateralism. As things stand, all 1,300 tons of declared chemicals by Syria have been removed from its territory, and 95% of these chemicals have now been destroyed. 2 weeks ago, the Cape Ray, a specially equipped US ship, finished neutralizing the overwhelming majority of the most dangerous chemicals in Syria's stockpile. And facilities in Finland, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States are rapidly completing the destruction process. In my remarks here today, I would like to briefly recap how we got to where we are in eliminating Syria's chemical weapons program. This mission has attested not only to the robustness and responsiveness of the Chemical Weapons Convention, but also to the flexibility and innovation that its members have shown in tackling various issues in unprecedented circumstances. Apart from Syria, I will also outline some of the emerging challenges for chemical disarmament, as well as efforts to prevent their re-emergence, and what we are doing to address them now and into the future. The gruesome sarin attack in Damascus suburb of Ghouta on 21st August last year, together with the international outcry that followed, precipitated an extraordinary series of events. Russia and the United States played a pivotal role in devising a way forward on Syria's chemical demilitarization. Syria had decided to join the Chemical Weapons Convention on 14 September. The framework document agreed by Russia and the United States in Geneva paved the way for an historic decision by the OPCW's Executive Council on 27 September on an accelerated program for eliminating Syria's chemical weapons. As a measure of the international community's resolve, this decision was endorsed that same day by unanimous adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2118. It was a day of rapid and efficient diplomacy in response to a completely unforeseen situation. For its part, the OPCW hit the ground running. Our first team of inspectors arrived in Damascus within 4 days after the Executive Council decision was adopted, and the OPCW-UN Joint Mission in Syria was formally established on 16 October. Within a matter of weeks, the mission recorded several early successes ahead of set target dates, including submission by Syria of a full declaration of its chemical weapon sites, destruction of all unfilled chemical munitions, and the functional destruction of chemical weapons production facilities. Despite several delays and challenging hurdles, the mission and the agreement underpinning it has set a standard for the international community in responding to disarmament opportunities. The success of our organization in working together with the United Nations to oversee the destruction of Syria's chemical stockpile in the midst of a civil war depended on an extraordinary collective effort. It consisted of in-kind and financial assistance from more than 30 countries and the European Union. The support ranged from providing transport vehicles, packing equipment and cargo vessels, to dispatching naval escorts and opening up government and commercial facilities for the destruction of chemicals. I wish to take this opportunity to express once again our deep gratitude for the generous financial contribution to the OPCW Trust Fund by the European Union. Not only has the Syria mission established a vital precedent for responding quickly and effectively to opportunities for disarmament, it has reminded us that there can be pathways for cooperation where there is a will. The mission to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons during a raging conflict and in highly compressed timeframes was an unprecedented challenge for us. It stretched us to new limits, demanding a great deal of professional commitment and personal courage on the part of personnel deployed to Syria, as well as flexibility and innovation on the part of our member states in expediting removal and destruction operations. Take, for example, the OPCW inspectors on the ground in Syria, who for the first time in their careers had to wear bulletproof vests on top of their hazmat suits while accessing sites in blistering 40-degree heat. We were made only too aware of the dangers on 27th May, when a convoy transporting members of the OPCW fact-finding mission looking into allegations of use of chlorine came under attack. An armored vehicle was destroyed by an IED, and the convoy was then ambushed. In these operational circumstances, the United Nations has been a vital partner for the OPCW in navigating logistical and security obstacles that our inspectors had previously not had to deal with. There was also no textbook solution for removal and out-of-country destruction of chemical weapons. Simply put, it had never been done before. It's a credit to our member states that in agreeing to such an arrangement, they were able to show flexibility in their adherence to the Chemical Weapons Convention in a way that was true to its spirit. But more than this was required. The complexity of the challenge meant that lateral thinking and technological innovation were at premium. Two innovative solutions stand out in this respect: the destruction of chemical stockpiles at sea and engagement with the private sector regarding disposal of industrial chemicals used in Syria's chemical weapons program. Faced with the absence of a land-based destruction option, the United States mounted two of its field-deployable hydrolysis systems aboard the Cape Ray. This creative solution solved the destruction of Syrian stocks of sulfur, mustard, and main precursor chemicals, some 600 tons, in a remarkably short period of time in an effective, safe, and environmentally sound way. The OPCW also pioneered a public-private partnership in expediting the destruction of other chemicals, as well as the effluents resulting from operations aboard the Cape Ray. Given that many of the chemicals used in Syria's chemical weapons program were industrial, commercially traded chemicals, the OPCW devised a solution for dealing with them by putting their disposal to commercial tender. At the end of the solicitation process, two companies, one in Finland and another one in the United States, were awarded contracts to undertake this task, whose completion is now well in sight. Throughout this process, both the OPCW and the Joint Mission have been assiduous in ensuring as much transparency as possible. As shareholders in an enormous investment in an extraordinary mission, the international community has been at all times kept apprised of our progress and of how we are addressing manifold challenges. Ongoing challenges include finalizing arrangements for the destruction of 12 chemical weapons production facilities and obtaining further clarification of Syria's initial declaration. Work in both these areas is well advanced. At the same time, the work of the fact-finding mission looking into allegations of chlorine gas attacks continues apace. The success of the Syria mission owes much to the international effort that has underwritten its implementation. But we must not lose sight of the fact that it was enabled not by a specially mandated ad hoc arrangement, but rather by an existing, highly effective multilateral treaty, the Chemical Weapons Convention. It was the Convention's ready-made, tried and tested provisions that provided the basis for action. More than 20 years after it was concluded, the Convention remains the only legally binding international treaty banning an entire category of weapons of mass destruction under international verification. Let me remind you of what makes this treaty uniquely successful. The Chemical Weapons Convention is non-discriminatory. It commits all of its member states, without exception, to its prohibitions and obligations. There are no haves and have-nots. All those possessing chemical weapons must destroy their stockpiles, and all states parties must ensure on an ongoing basis that chemistry is used only for peaceful purposes within their jurisdictions. The Convention is also comprehensive, prohibiting not only the use of chemical weapons, but also their development, production, stockpiling, transfer, and retention. And most importantly, its provisions are backed by strict international verification. As the guardian of the Convention, the OPCW works to ensure that all of its members are in full compliance with their obligations, including through regular on-site inspections at industrial facilities of interest. To date, we have conducted more than 2,500 inspections in more than 80 countries, with a current rate of some 241 inspections a year. More than this, the Convention has a provision for challenge inspections to guard against the possibility of any of its members covertly undertaking banned activities. These provisions are the bedrock of the practical disarmament and non-proliferation record that the OPCW and its member states have chalked up over the past 17 years. A record that has so far seen more than 84% of declared chemical weapons destroyed, a membership that has swelled to 190 states, and ever-growing international cooperation on assistance and protective measures, as well as peaceful uses of chemistry. A record that last year achieved international recognition by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee in a single runner for the OPCW, acknowledging its extensive efforts to eliminate chemical weapons. And as the Syria mission has amply demonstrated, the Chemical Weapons Convention has proven its resilience as an enduring example of what can be achieved in multilateral disarmament. The challenge of eliminating Syria's chemical weapons program has only served to reinforce our sense of purpose and sharpen our view of the strategic challenges looming ahead. These are many. First and foremost is achieving universal adherence to the Convention. Let us not forget that the extraordinary collective efforts in Syria drew its strength from a near universal consensus, a consensus based on the established norm that no country should be allowed to possess far less use chemical weapons. There can be no justification for remaining outside a treaty that guarantees the indivisibility of chemical security. This is the message that we are reinforcing with the 6 countries still outside the Convention: Angola, Egypt, Israel, Myanmar, North Korea, and South Sudan. Whatever reasons these countries might cite for not being members, they should not lose sight of one essential fact. The Chemical Weapons Convention is an accepted global norm, and the international community has clearly shown that it's willing to act on this basis in relation to Syria. It's high time, therefore, that all 6 non-member countries either speed up their internal processes for acceding to the treaty or reconsider the overwhelmingly persuasive arguments for getting them underway. We are working closely with states parties to make this a reality, for we are determined to ensure that the Convention's reach be broad enough to prevent any repeat of tragedies such as the one witnessed in Ghouta last year. To this end, more also needs to be done to bolster implementation of the Convention at the national level. 17 years since the Convention's entry into force, many states parties have still not established mechanisms for meeting their obligations, or in some cases even adopted implementing legislation. This is a serious shortcoming, since we ultimately can only be as strong as our weakest link. The EU has been a vital partner in seeking to universalize and enhance adherence to the Convention, making generous voluntary contributions to OPCW activities in this area and promoting EU regulations as a model for best practice in relation to implementation. EU member states have especially valuable links in regions where implementation is not yet satisfactory, notably in Africa. We are looking to better coordinate our efforts to improve the situation, as well as to draw non-state parties into the Convention. Other major challenges ahead relate to how we at the OPCW will need to recalibrate our priorities and reallocate resources when, not long from now, we have achieved complete destruction of existing stockpiles of chemical weapons. In this post-destruction phase, our ongoing success will be measured not just by weapons destroyed, but by weapons not rebuilt. For this, we will need to ensure that our verification regime keeps pace with the globalization of the chemical industry, as well as rapid advances in science and technology. New improvements in chemical production technology will lead to new possibilities for small-scale production of chemicals. This will potentially present new verification challenges, as the range of facilities capable of making and handling dual-use chemicals increases significantly. Likewise, the growing convergence of biology and chemistry could call into question the integrity of our current monitoring mechanisms. A further challenge, one that current global non-proliferation norms are ill-equipped for dealing with, is that posed by non-state actors. Several extremist groups have made no secret of their aim to acquire and to use weapons of mass destruction. In the case of chemical weapons, the dangers are very real, especially if we consider the threat posed by options for using conventional means to bring about a toxic chemical incident. To meet these challenges, we need to stay alert and be able to adapt. The Syria mission showed the world that the OPCW and states parties can innovate in the face of unforeseen challenges. It's clear that we will need every inch of flexibility and inventiveness that we have shown to date in order to prepare for these new and emerging challenges. We will need to find durable and effective ways to address rapid advances in science and technology, not only as potential risks, but also opportunities for enhancing our security. New technological developments can be a force for good, enhancing methods of gathering, transmitting, and retrieving data, which might help with monitoring and verification. For example, through its Secure Information Exchange Project, SIX, the OPCW has established a tool for states parties to share their declarations and information on transfers of scheduled chemicals by electronic means. This will ensure more accurate and timely submission of declarations and enhance the effectiveness of the verification regime. This equally applies to new communication tools, as evidenced by the role that social media has recently played in bringing new sources of data to our attention. All this can help us turn challenges into opportunities. To do so effectively as we transition to post-destruction priorities, we will need to expand and bolster our partnerships with science and industry. We will also need to carve out new constituencies in universities, schools, and civil society for conveying the message that science must at all times work in the service of peace and never again for the detriment of humanity. And we will need to deepen our cooperation with other international organizations. This goes well beyond our vital partnership with the United Nations, whether on the ground in Syria or in promoting disarmament. Our interaction with specialized international agencies is identifying new ways of enhancing chemical security, whether in addressing transnational crime and terrorism, or building capacity for chemical emergency response. We are also working with other arms control treaty organizations to exchange best practices, especially in verification. Finally, we will need to draw on the support of our states parties in enhancing our historic cooperative venture, as well as that of influential regional organizations such as the European Union. Because it's vital that we work collectively to ensure that our efforts to prevent the re-emergence of chemical weapons is given priority at national decision-making levels, despite the difficulties of quantifying progress in this area. Syria has shown that no value can be placed on having the mechanisms in place to respond to disarmament opportunities. The onus is now on us to ensure that these and other disarmament gains are made permanent. I am confident that the Convention and its holistic regime is sufficiently robust to allow us to meet this weighty responsibility. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you all the best for fruitful and stimulating discussions over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Ambassador, Director General, thank you so much for sharing with us your experience in not only the management of the Syrian chemical disarmament, but also on the role of the OPCW in these difficult times. The Director General has kindly accepted to take a few questions, so I will ask you to raise your hand. I don't see extremely well, so if I don't recognize you, please introduce yourself. Ambassador Abe.
Can I just speak seated?
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Nobuya Abe from Japan. Congratulations on Director General Üzümcü for the successful mission completed by the OPCW. You mentioned next task is how to prevent the use of chemical weapons again, or prevent the proliferation of chemical weapons. In that respect, my hope, wishful thinking, is that the whole series of events in Syria helped raise the taboo against the use of chemical weapons, strengthened the international norm against the use of chemical weapons. In that sense, I hope the world should have received the message that you should not be using chemical weapons, or you should not even think about getting hands over nuclear weapons. What is the predominant atmosphere in The Hague, and what is your view on this?
I agree with you, Ambassador, that the threshold of using chemical weapons has, in fact, risen higher than before after the Syria experience. And we think that, in fact, the use of CWs by any country, in fact, is a remote likelihood from now on. Nevertheless, as I said in my statement, the risks of the CW being used by non-state actors is a real concern in the minds of our state parties. And there have been reports, in fact, of attempts to acquire those substances, dual-use substances, by certain terrorist groups. Therefore, there is really a need to be vigilant and to reinforce, in fact, the measures by individual state parties, but also to reinforce certain mechanisms that could be put in force or which are already in force by the international community as a whole. So that's the main security concern, I believe, which occupies the minds of the state parties at this juncture.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Trezza.
Thank you. Carlo Trezza from Italy. I was interested to hear that OPCW is also ready to consider convincing non-state actors to abide by the convention. How would you envisage this, and how, to deal with the problem of legitimizing these non-state actors by dealing with them? Thank you.
I should apologize for being misunderstood. I never meant, that we would have a dialogue with the terrorists to convince them not to use chemical weapons. Not at all. We know that, ICRC, for instance, has been in contact, and some NGOs, in fact, based in Geneva, have been in contact with the non-state actors to convince them not to use anti-personnel landmines or some other weapons. But as to the CW, to my knowledge, there has not been such an attempt. And as the organization, we never thought of, taking such an initiative. What I meant, in fact, was to implement fully the convention and effectively by all state parties in order to prevent, in fact, the access of non-state actors to dual-use chemical materials which might be misused by them. The general, in fact, understanding of our state parties is that the full and effective implementation of the convention by all, in fact, would be an essential input to counter-terrorism efforts by the international community. We have some, in fact, interaction and cooperation with 1540, process, and we are working with UNICRI and some other UN agencies, and we want to step up all those efforts since I think this state parties, in fact, do think that we can play a useful role in this respect. Let me add that as to the convention, in fact, there is no mention of terrorism, counterterrorism within the convention. This text, as you know, was negotiated in the 1980s and concluded in the early 1990s. And at that time, the terrorism was not really a major security concern. Therefore, without, in fact, a specific reference to counterterrorism, there might be some questions, but generally, it's well accepted that the spirit of the convention, at least, if not letter, does provide a mandate, in fact, to the OPCW to play a useful role in this respect.
Thank you very much. I do have 8 questions on my list, which means we are getting a bit tight in terms of timing, so I will close the list now, and I will turn to the gentleman right here. Please introduce yourself.
Philip Hall from the United Kingdom. Director General, thank you for a thought-provoking and encouraging speech, and thank you to you and your staff for leading a very successful international effort over the past year on Syria. I'd just like to introduce a note of concern, which is that we might feel a sense of comfort or reassurance from that, because I hope that everyone here is feeling an acute sense of discomfort that the use of chemical weapons continues today. The evidence is overwhelming, even if the proof is lacking. And I'd, as I say, like to thank you and your staff for leading an effort over the past year. I think it's important to remember that effort is ongoing, and there are some very brave people trying to investigate the current allegations. Secondly, I'd like to pick up on your call for universalization of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Next year, you'll be leading, I think, the 100th anniversary, the marking of the 100th anniversary of the use of chemical weapons. It is now established and a strengthened norm, I think, over the past year, that the possession and use of these weapons is unacceptable by civilized nations. And can I encourage you and indeed everyone here to try to, or to call on all the 6 remaining states that have not signed the convention yet to do so by that 100th anniversary. Sometimes there is nothing like a deadline to focus the mind, and I hope we can all work towards that deadline to try and achieve the true full universalization of the convention. Thank you.
Actually, I would strongly support this appeal. This is what we are doing as the Technical Secretariat and myself as Director General. We are making, in fact, quite significant efforts to engage those states not yet party. For instance, just last week we sent a delegation to Myanmar in order to hold a second round of workshops there, in order to convince the government, in fact, to accede or to ratify the convention without delay. As you might know, Myanmar is a signatory state, but they didn't ratify it. The second, in fact, if you wish, low-hanging fruit is the Angola. And again, we have been, in fact, making several demarches over the past years to engage this country. We understand that there is no specific, in fact, reason for them to stay away, but this wasn't a priority so far. You know, for other reasons, it's similar thinking applies to South Sudan. South Sudan was a party to the convention when it was part of the Greater Sudan. And I think this is rather a formality, and we think that's a matter of time. One, in fact, concern we have noticed among, you know, those states not party was the challenge inspection mechanism, in fact, that apparently seems to be a worry among the military establishment, particularly in Myanmar and Angola. So we tried to explain to them in fact, this mechanism, which has never been applied so far, but which may, of course, be invoked. But this wouldn't be used casually, and it would be used only for the compliance, in fact, purpose of the convention, and nothing, and it wouldn't be abused. So that's where we stand. You know the situation with regard to the Middle East, Egypt, and Israel. We think that after Syria's accession to the convention, the situation has changed, and those two countries, from our point of view, should reconsider their positions. And as North Korea, they didn't respond to any démarche we have undertaken so far.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much, Henk van der Kwast, Dutch Ambassador for Disarmament. Thank you, Mr. Director General, for your interesting introduction. Syria was a particular case in the sense that the OPCW and the UN work together. I am very interested, looking back and looking at the current situation, how do you evaluate that cooperation? What were the strong and the weak points, and where were learning points? Thank you.
I think this was a unique experience for the OPCW as well as for the UN. We had the first cooperation, in fact, with the UN during the investigation of alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria, when, in fact, the OPCW has made available its resources based on the convention and the relationship agreement between the UN OPCW for the US Secretary General mechanism. At that time, you will remember, Syria was not yet a party to the convention, and therefore this was the only mechanism, in fact, which could be applied in the circumstances. And this experience has been quite successful. The Secretary General has appointed, in fact, a head of mission, a Swedish scientist, and we have provided 9 experts. The WHO provided 3 experts, and they did a very good job, in fact, also under the supervision, oversight of Angela Kane, who is present today. And we had a very good cooperation. And following this, when Syria has decided to become a party to the convention, so several options were considered, and in the end, a joint mission was established, as I said earlier. A special coordinator was appointed by the Secretary in consultation with me, and the special coordinator, in fact, was on the ground to coordinate the activities of this mission. And I think, in the end, in spite of some doubts, initial doubts, the cooperation has worked quite well. I mean, the results also are a proof of that. But it went quite smoothly. The special coordinator regularly reported to the Security Council. I in fact, sent my written reports, monthly reports to the Secretary General through him to Security Council. And the special coordinator came also to make some statements at the Executive Council of the OPCW. We invited her. So I think overall it was quite satisfactory and it went smoothly.
Thank you very much. I will maybe, for the sake of time, take questions 2 by 2 as we are now beyond our time limit, but I don't want to prevent the conversation from continuing. And as I chair the next session, I'm in the easy position of being only rude to myself and my fellow speakers. So who was next? I think it was on my right. So Joëlle, former Director General.
Thank you very much. As former Director General of the OPCW until 2010, I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the leadership, the brilliant leadership of Ahmet Üzümcü at the OPCW. I think he has taken the organization to new heights, and certainly the Syrian issue has been the one which has proven the excellence of the leadership as well as the composition of the OPCW's technical secretariat. And I also want to pay tribute to the dedicated staff, which I think have done brilliantly to enhance the standing of the organization. Director General, I just wanted to ask you, you refer very briefly to the future composition of the technical secretariat in the light of developments, whether you could elaborate a bit more on that. How do you see the future of the OPCW technical secretariat adjusting to circumstances in the future? Thank you.
I'll change my name is Ambassador Mahmoud Karim. I'm from Egypt. I'll change the attention to Ms. Jenny with a question. Actually, I agree with most of the elements that she has mentioned in her excellent statement. But however, she may be right in saying that we are safer because Syria has acceded to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and imagine if the situation would have been different. And at face value, this statement is correct. However, in reality, and from what we are seeing in our part of the world, from the emergence of highly sophisticated non-state actors, armed with a very difficult ideology, in synergy with foreign competence, and most of these foreign competence come actually with high technical and specialized scientific experience. And we have been seeing this actually in my own country, where Egypt is conducting a very difficult war on terror in Sinai, on the western border, and on our borders with the Sudan. So the point I'm trying to make is that there is a new reality evolving in our part of the world. And granted, the legal edifice is working, but it is not enough. The fact is that in order to succeed, we need new thinking, we need multilateral effort that should be put together in place very quickly in order to combat this new terror before it becomes armed with a weapon of mass destruction. Thank you.
Actually, I couldn't agree more. I fully agree that counterterrorism and dealing with the more sophisticated non-state actors, especially in the Middle East, but elsewhere in the world, also do require a collective response by the international community. And when it comes to the WMD issue, this, at least for the Chemical Weapons Convention, I believe this reinforces our appeal for full universality of the convention. The convention does provide, and the OPCW does provide, some opportunities for capacity building, and also, as I said earlier, the implementation of the convention, in fact, globally, would ensure, a higher degree of prevention of access but also if we fail to prevent a more effective emergency response. So we have various activities of capacity building in this area, and we are now promoting, in fact, regional cooperation for enhanced capacity in dealing with such emergencies in cooperation with other relevant international organizations like UN, OCHA, and others. So that's a priority for us, and it relates to the future of the organization too. Thank you, Ambassador Firter, for this question. And in fact, the states parties expect us to come up with a new structure for the Secretariat. Just a few years ago, after you left, after I took over, there were some big question marks about the future of the OPCW, especially of the technical sector, whether this mechanism would be needed in the future or not. Now this question, I guess, is irrelevant, not relevant anymore, so there's a consensus that we should keep this mechanism, perhaps at a at a downsized way, but clearly we will have to adapt, in fact, the Secretariat to the new priorities. For instance, the number of inspectors when you left was about 170, 180. Now there are 125, and it's likely that we decrease the number further down to 90, 100. But of course, there are always optimum. We cannot downsize further than a certain number if you want really to keep a full-fledged mechanism. And therefore, we hope that the states parties, in fact, will be supportive of this transition, which is quite a challenge. And once the Syria mission will be over, we intend to focus, in fact, on the transition work over the coming months and perhaps 1 or 2 years. And the transition, in fact, may take it even a longer, 3 to 4 years. And I think after 4 years, when we will have probably 3 to 4% of chemical weapons remaining to be destroyed in the United States and perhaps in Russia, we will be ready to meet, in fact, the new challenges and prepare ourselves for the post-destruction phase.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say what? No? No? Yeah, please. Come in.
If I may, since the Egyptian ambassador sort of asked a question also reacting on one of the points that I had made. And I entirely agree with you that we do need new thinking. And we are faced with a situation that is, at some respects, dramatic in its current consequences for the people in the region and its potential future consequences. I remain fundamentally convinced that thanks to the efforts of the OPCW, the UN, and the tremendous sort of international sort of intervention to remove the declared chemical stockpile, the situation is less dangerous than it could have been. It is not to say that it is not still a significant source of concern, and as was underlined by others, that the use of chemical weapons remains a threat in the region. The call for fresh thinking, I think, is a call for a much better integration of all the different types of interventions and engagement in the region. What we see is also the expression of long-running, deep causes across the region that will need to be addressed by the states of the region. There are profound grievances, historical, social, economic, political, that will need to be addressed, and this is eminently a political issue. The countries, the state of the region will have to come together to address the problem through a different way of aligning sort of cooperations and working together. There will not be a solution to the threats that the Middle East faces at the moment without a realignment of regional geopolitics. And I would say at the third level, in terms of the international community, of course the international community has to work very closely with the countries and the regions. And there, I remain deeply convinced that the efforts towards universalization, implementations of the treaty, strengthening of the international legal architecture, pertain to the long-term groundwork that we must continue to strive to progress, because this is the bedrock to limiting the risks of proliferations in the future. So it is an extremely complex set of issues that we're faced with, that we will not be able to progress unless we approach them at those different levels and combining all the different kinds of interventions that are possible.
Thank you, Joëlle. I'll bring the last questions in. So please.
Thank you, Ambassador, and I almost join other speakers in congratulating with you and the OPCW for the successful destruction of the Syrian stockpile. I have another question, however. Now, with the destruction of the stockpile, I think a chapter is closed, but there is a new chapter maybe is opening up regarding Syria and the Hague, is regarding the discrepancies of possible discrepancies of Syria's declaration, both under the aspect of correctness and also of completeness. Now, and what is worrying furthermore is that one of the discrepancies regard ricin, which stays at the juncture between chemical and biological weapons. But my question is the organization adapting to a new reality of verifying also the completeness? And do you envisage new instruments, for instance, to reinforce also the assessment capabilities of the organization, the evaluation of different sources of information regarding completeness in a way a bit similar to what the International Atomic Energy Agency Department of Safeguards made in the latest years? Because now if there is the challenge to verify completeness is a very complex one, because until now you can verify correctness by comparing declaration with verification of the stockpile actual on the field, but completeness could be another very difficult business. And there is an experience, however, on the nuclear field that can be also taken into account. Thank you, Ambassador.
And Nabila.
Yes. Good morning. Ariel Levite of the Carnegie Endowment. Congratulations, Director General, on both laying out the accomplishments as well as laying out the challenges that still lie ahead. I want to compliment the previous person who asked the question by asking not just with respect to remaining materials but also infrastructure covered in the Syria case, whether we're able to make any progress in investigating assistance that the Syrian chemical weapons program had received, and which I think is quite troubling. And third is the extent to which the what's in and what's really out of the treaty in terms of the distinction between the generic scope and the list of materials is not an issue which we need to come to grips with in Syria and more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Nabila, please.
Thank you. May I say that I believe a lot in cloning. You know, we can clone some of us to be two rather than one. Let me say this. Thank you very much, Director General. Thank you, Director Jenny. My point is this: we would not have advancements in the field of disarmament if the situation in the ground did not unravel. we wouldn't have this advance in terms of the convention in Syria getting rid of its chemical weapons if there was no crisis in Syria. The political situation needed to be addressed, but then we focused on the disarmament we still have. The political situation still is with us. For the Ukraine, there was a condition that Ukraine adhere to the NPT, and it had to get rid of these nuclear weapons, which were not Ukraine's, they were Soviet weapons. I think sometimes we concentrate too much on the instruments of disarmament after the fact and not address the facts that we have to address when it comes to the crisis. Thank you.
And last, Tariq Rauf.
Thank you, Tariq Rauf from CIPRI. Director General, my question was addressed with regard to the UN Secretary General's investigative mechanism for CBW use. And looking to the future, to what extent do you think your organization could help build capacity, train inspectors for the roster, and be able to provide equipment and technical expertise should there be future call on this investigative mechanism? Thank you.
Let me start by the last question. Actually, the convention does provide, in fact, a basis, as well as the relationship agreement between the UN and OPCW, a basis for making available the OPCW resources for the UNSG mechanism when it applies to states not party. So if the alleged use does in fact occur, take place in a state party, so this is the OPCW which should in fact initiate an investigation of alleged use. So we have mechanisms in place and which can be invoked by any state party, and the TS in fact has the mandate to deploy its inspectors and to investigate such alleged use of chemical weapons. But if it happens in one of the states not party or on a territory which is not controlled by a state party, then the UNSG mechanism should be invoked, and we would of course make available our resources for this mechanism. On the declarations, let me begin with the Syria declaration. Syria clearly made an initial declaration, as other states parties did when they joined the convention. And on the accuracy of this declaration, we have had a chance, in fact, to raise several questions with the Syrian authorities. Now this process is underway. In fact, the expert team will travel for the third time to Syria very soon. And the purpose is, in fact, to complete the declaration. There has been some progress on certain matters, and we will raise some other questions. And we hope that we can make the declaration full. If some states parties do still have some question marks in their minds on the accuracy, completeness of this declaration, of course, there is a mechanism provided by the Executive Council decision as well as Security Council resolution, but also by the Convention, if necessary, to invoke inspection on the ground, clearly with some precise information to be provided. So the inspectors could be deployed on a short notice, and in order to establish the facts with such allegations of continued possession of chemical weapons assets. As to the generally speaking, the evaluation of declarations, this is a very important issue and priority for the future of the organization. We think that the capacity of the TS is not yet adequate on the evaluation. We are now improving our, as I mentioned earlier in my statement, we are improving the electronic declaration mechanism, but still the evaluation capacity will have to be enhanced, and the discrepancies, which are still quite high between export, imports, and movements of dual-use chemical materials, we have to address this seriously, and we will need, of course, the cooperation of our states parties in this respect. But this is, again, will be a priority for the future. With regard to infrastructure remaining in Syria, there are 5 underground facilities and 7 aircraft shelters which were used for production purposes. In all those facilities, there is no equipment left, and every equipment was already destroyed or rendered unusable. Now the structures, as to the hangars, will have to be raised to the ground as the convention does require, and the underground tunnels facilities will have to be filled and in fact plugged. So this may take some time. We think that the continuation of this mission in Syria now, not as a joint mission as of 30th September, but as the OPCW mission supported by UNOPS as of 1st of October, will deal with those matters, and it may take another 6 to 7 months. As to the history of the Syrian chemical weapons program, in fact, they made some declarations, and as the convention requires, they had to declare what they received or what they purchased, in fact, from several countries for this program. And we have a full history, and we are looking at it. If there are gaps, we will address them. So this is, again, an ongoing work. Thank you.
Thank you. I had one last comment from Angela Kane on the SG mechanism, I guess.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And I just wanted to say, and I thank Tariq for the question also, I think that one of the reasons why we were able so quickly to get off the ground last year on the investigation was precisely because Director General Üzümcü and I had signed a memorandum of understanding for cooperation just the year before, which followed also a more formal arrangement with the United Nations in general. One of the issues with the training is it will continue, and in fact we've had more requests from member states also for it to be continued, because not only is it applicable to the chemical weapons, but it's also applicable to the biological weapons, and that's really the point I wanted to make, because there is no verification mechanism in the Biological Weapons Convention, as we all know. So there is a possibility that this might kick in, also because our Italian colleague, I think, had brought up the question of resin, which is kind of a gray area. Now, there is one gray area that I do want to point out, and that is that the Secretary General's mechanism really refers to member states bringing a situation to the attention of the Secretary General. And Director General Üzümcü mentioned that in the territory not controlled by a state's party, they are unable to intervene in that. And that is precisely the gray area that needs to be sorted out, exactly who is going to be responsible there. But I think that that is potentially very troubling, particularly because we've seen an expansion of an area that is not under control of a particular state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are running late, so I want to close this opening session by thanking the Director General for not only his speech, but also taking so many questions and providing so detailed answer. Thanking Joëlle for being with us for this opening session as well. And the bad news is that there is no coffee break, as you could expect, because you had coffee before we started. But the good news is that we will move straight into the Iran panel, which is, I guess, one of the panels that will lead to a lot of attention on your part. And thank you so much to all of you for engaging already so much. And thank you.